Revoluția Demnității este numele dat luptei pe care ucrainenii au dus-o în ianuarie și februarie 2014 pentru a ieși de sub influența Rusiei. Luptă până la capăt, sub gloanțe, pentru a trăi într-o democrație europeană. A fost finalul violent al unui șir lung de proteste, cunoscute și în România ca Euromaidan. Atunci au început ciocnirile violente între protestatari și forțele de securitate ale președintelui Victor Ianucovici. Acesta a decis brusc să nu mai semneze acordul de asociere și liber schimb cu Uniunea Europeană, ceea ce ar fi însemnat un pas mai aproape pentru Ucraina spre Europa. În schimb, a optat pentru legături mai strânse cu Rusia și Belarus în Uniunea Economică Euroasiatică. Decizia i-a înfuriat pe ucrainieni care au ieșit în stradă încă din noiembrie 2013. Revoluția Demnității din 2014 a însemnat 108 morți din rândul protestatarilor și 13 din rândul polițiștilor. Până la urmă, Victor Ianucovici a demisionat și a fugit în Rusia, unde se adăpostește și în prezent. Elizabeth Pulvas avea 15 ani atunci. Cu toate acestea, a decis să participe la proteste în Kiev, deși lângă ea mureau oameni. A rămas în piață pentru că și ea dorea ca Ucraina să se rupă de Rusia. Elizabeth Pulvas este azi cu noi și ne povestește ce a determinat-o să meargă atunci în piață. Hello. So, you were 15, but still went to Maidan Square and protest along with others, although there was a risk of losing your life and maybe be arrested. Why not? What determined you to go there?
You see, at that time, we as a youth, basically realized for the first time that we are Ukrainians. We felt it like, I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it's in our blood, because back then, in 2004, when the first Maidan, not the first initially, it was the second.
Orange Revolution.
The Orange Revolution, but basically, in historical pace, it was
Yes.
the second Maidan in Ukraine. Happened, I was like 5 years old, but I remember this very brightly in my mind, and I remember how everyone was supporting Viktor Yushchenko back then, and we were singing these songs about Yushchenko, and it's a funny memory from our childhood, but still, it's somehow in our blood to understand what is better for the country and what is the best choice, the most free and the most democratic one. So when Yanukovych claimed to sign the association agreement with European Union, we all felt like we were betrayed, because we traveled to Europe. We saw that Europe is more developed than our country, and we understood why, even back then, even being like 15, 16 years old. Because of the democratic values, of course, for instance, it's the basis of how European Union works. And of course, economical potential and everything else. But still, the main point was to protect our right to choose and our right to be heard. I think that was the main idea.
But as the Russian propaganda says today, and said that time, Ukrainians are Russian. Why did you want to live away from Russia? What was so bad about Russia that you want to put aside?
You see, we didn't need to put anything aside just because we're at the very core of our nations super different. Yes, we live nearby, but Polish and Romania also, Poland, I mean, and Romania also are nearby. Can you say that you are Polish? Not, of course not. So we're just different nations who happen to be near geographically, and also Ukraine was under Russian influence for at least 300 years from the beginning of the expansion of Russian Empire to Ukrainian territory. Of course, back then we weren't a solid country as we are now, like past 30 years. But still, for the first thing, we didn't need to be out of Russia, because we are not Russians, we are Ukrainians, and we feel this identity. Second thing is that the developments, even in 2014, when everything was better in terms of freedom of speech and democracy in Russia, a little bit better, we still saw all the limitations all the censorship that is happening. And that was not the world we wanted to live in. We wanted to live as we used to, in a very free country in terms of what we can say, what we cannot say. Ukraine, yes.
Have you been? Were you the only teenager there, or there were other colleagues of yours that fought, that protest in Maidan Square?
There were a lot of teenagers on the Maidan. Of course, my mother didn't allow me to go there. We were going sometimes, but the thing is that my school is basically just near the square, which is called Maidan Незалежності, where Maidan happened, the Dignity Revolution. And one day we were evacuated from school just because the developments of Maidan started to get worse. And when we were evacuated from school by our parents, I was evacuated by the father of my friend. We saw snipers on the buildings near our school. So yes, it was pretty risky, and I understand why my mother didn't want me to go there. But we still wanted to be there, to present our idea and to stand for it. And sometimes we went there with family also. At the weekdays,
Your parents were there?
Yes, we joined the rally with parents. We brought food there, we brought blankets there, we brought warm clothes there.
On Maidan, there were not only Ukrainians, but there were other people from abroad who came to help and to fight next to Ukrainians. One of these guys is Carl Plesner, who is a Danish, he's from Denmark, and went on Maidan on 2014. We talked to Carl about his experience in 2014 in Maidan, in Kiev, and we also talked about his continuous fight for Ukraine after the Maidan ended. Let's hear what Carl has to say.
I came to the protest. I was invited by a network of volunteers that was evacuating wounded Maidan activists out of Ukraine at that time, secretly. And they had talked with the church, with the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and the head of the church recommended that this network would find some expertise in nonviolent resistance. And with that encouragement, they reached out to the international network of certified trainers in nonviolent communication, and I replied to the call. And less than 4 days after I had started communicating, I was standing in Kiev and came to Maidan on February the 11th, 2014.
Why was necessary that those persons to be evacuated in secret?
It was necessary for the wounded Maidan activists to be evacuated secretly because to begin with, they went to the hospital. The thing was that at the hospital, police dressed in civilian would show up and take these people with them, and they would simply disappear. So to my knowledge, as I understand it, around 200 people went missing that way. They were picked up by police and civilian from Ukrainian hospitals, and they simply disappeared. So when Maidan activists saw that this happened, they decided they wanted to stay on Maidan. They would not leave Maidan under no circumstances. And I talked with a few of them, and they basically said that they rather die on Maidan than running the risk of going to a public hospital and be picked up by police and civilian uniforms and disappear.
After 8 years, can you explain to the Romanian viewers and to all the viewers, where did this stubbornness, let's say, come from? Because, you know, to face the death for an idea, after all, it's not very common. Why do you think Ukrainians had this will to die for an idea, for a concept?
Yeah, so that is a really good question, and I have spent 8 years understanding the answer to that question, and I'm still in the process. And I will share with you what I found out so far. And what I found out is that Ukraine is not so much about a flag or about certain food, or Ukraine is an idea, it's an identity, it's a feeling, it's a life experience. And the concept of Ukraine as a life experience, as an idea, have been alive for more than 300 years and much longer than that. And that idea, it manifests itself, of course, through the culture and the language. But it certainly manifests itself as a belonging, as a sense of this is the country, this is the people, this is the land, this is the culture, the language that I belong to. And during Soviet times, Ukrainian identity was massively suppressed by Soviet occupation. And although that the Ukrainian identity was suppressed, it was still alive in people. You could say that it's like a grain that was lying, waiting in the dry sand, waiting for rain to come, so it will sprout, so it will become a plant. And that happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then Ukraine became an independent nation, and that seed that people have been carrying for so many, more than 70 years during Soviet times, it finally sprouted and became the plant, the bush, the tree that we all know and see and recognize today as the nation of Ukraine, with its separate language, with its culture, with the geographic borders, and with its flag and culture and the rest of it. And during Maidan, people that I talk with, they had a very, very strong identity of feeling Ukrainian inside as something very different from feeling Russian. And people really wanted to be part of a free democratic world. And they understood that the president at that time, Yanukovych, he did not adhere to democratic principles. He turned toward Russia, towards Putin. He was not promoting the idea of freedom, of democracy, free press, and zero corruption that so many Ukrainians, in particular the youth, really wanted to support. And the first ones that went to Maidan, that was actually Ukrainian youth from universities. And what happened was that they went to Maidan, they protested against Yanukovych's agreement with Russia to strengthen ties, economic ties with Russia. And they were waving flags of European Union and Ukraine together. And the colors are the same, blue and yellow. It's just a different pattern on the flag. Yanukovych hit hard on this through his riot police. Many wounded activists were filmed being beaten by the riot police, and it was broadcasted widely on TV. And this was the ignition that basically made tens of thousands of Ukrainians deciding, this is not okay. We go to Maidan, we protest. This is not okay. We don't want to have a president that behave that way. In particular, not against innocent, unarmed students. So, and I would like to add a really beautiful story here that really hit me very hard. So, the first day I came to Ukraine, it was in the late afternoon. I walked out of the airport. We drove to Maidan, and I went to very close to the parliament on the Maidan side of the barricade on Hufchesko Street. I'm sorry for my pronunciation; it's really bad here. And it looked like an apocalypse. You had burned out cars, you had burned out buses, you had fires in old metal oil drums. You had that heavy, heavy smell of burnt gasoline. And you had the riot police standing in huge shield walls in front of you. And here I was having a talk with a very, very young guy, activist, with a cigarette in his mouth, hanging in his mouth. He was mixing Molotov cocktails. And I asked him while he was smoking the cigarette, so it was a very short conversation. I asked him, for what reason are you fighting here? What are you trying to achieve? And what he said to me, that was a personal story. He said, I'm an orphan. I never knew my parents. I grew up in an orphanage. No one likes me. No one loves me. No one remembers who I am. No one knows my name. If I live here, if I fight the riot police for a just, corruption-free, democratic Ukraine. If I die fighting for that, then at least someone will remember me, my name. At least I have made that contribution for Ukraine. And he said that while smoking a cigarette and mixing Molotov cocktails.
You are now back in Ukraine. Where are you when we are talking?
Yeah, so I'm sitting here in my car. We were very delayed in some meetings. And right now I am in Ivano-Frankivsk. And we have been shopping in a big supermarket in Epicenter. There's a lot of items we need. We cannot get so many items in Ukraine as we would like to. So we need to drive long distances in order to get blankets for our beds and many other ordinary utilities.
It's extraordinary what Carl said. Do you think he captured correctly the spirit of the Dignity Revolution and what happens in Ukraine even today?
Yes, I think that he is more than accurate in his views on what was happening on Maidan, especially the story about the young guy who smoked a cigarette doing cocktail Molotov. That was some kind of courage, of course, back then, and people really wanted to be important and to be important for their homeland, basically, not to be important just to be important for themselves, but to be important for their homeland. Yes.
The Revolution of Dignity was an historic moment. You took part of an historic moment. We talked about this important moment in recent history of Ukraine with a Romanian historian, Cosmin Popa.
Maidanul este, dacă vreți, punctul culminant al unei mișcări politice, culturale și mentale care a început în Ucraina mai de mult. A început în 2004 cu celebra campanie electorală care i-a adus față în față pe președintele Victor Iușenko, pe cel care avea să fie președintele Victor Iușenko și pe cel care avea să fie viitorul președinte Ianucovici. O campanie marcată de interferența masivă a Rusiei în procesul electoral, de nereguli electorale care mai declare mai clare, care a dus până la urmă la un tip de repetare a scrutinului și la victoria președintelui Ianucovici. Considerați, dacă vreți, Revoluția portocalie de atunci ca fiind preludiul Maidanului. De altfel, ceea ce a stat la baza reacției ruse la mișcările de emancipare civică, politică și chiar națională din Europa, din Ucraina, a fost exact această obsesie a Revoluției portocalii. A Revoluției portocalii din 2004-2005 din Ucraina, care l-a adus la putere pe președintele Ianucovici. Practic, delimitarea foarte clară a liniilor în interiorul Ucrainei între partizanii modernizării Ucrainei, partizanii, dacă vreți, ai desăvârșirii construcției naționale ucrainene și cei ai rămânerii Rusiei, rămânerii Ucrainei sub umbrela civilizațională, politică, economică și culturală a Rusiei, s-a petrecut atunci. Ceea ce a accelerat, a radicalizat reacția societății ucrainene în timpul Maidanului a fost nu numai, dacă vreți, încercarea regimului Ianucovici de a calma spiritele folosind forța. Pentru că și aici trebuie să recunoaștem faptul că Ianucovici a fost tot timpul așa într-un purgatoriu, neștiind hotărât pentru ce să opteze. Cu siguranță sub influența presiunilor exercitate de la Moscova, care i-au propus și i-au trimis lui Ianucovici asistență în cele mai diferite forme, pornind de la asistență, dacă vreți, polițienească, până la asistență informațională și informativă. Ianucovici se afla între presiunile Rusiei, presiuni exprimate într-o formă foarte contundentă și doleanțele legitime ale societății ucrainene, ale societății ucrainene urbane. Pentru că aici trebuie să vedem Maidanul și, într-o bună măsură, și ca o confruntare puternică între ruralitate și urbanitate. Ianukovici a optat în cele din urmă, în decembrie, dar cu precădere în ianuarie, atunci când Parlamentul, controlat pentru o scurtă bucată de el, a optat pentru confruntarea cu societatea. Ciocnirile care au atins punctul culminant în prima parte a lui februarie 2014 au dus practic, 1, la delegitimarea regimului Ianukovici, un regim care a folosit forța militară brută împotriva propriilor cetățeni, adresându-se societății pe care se presupunea că o reprezintă de pe niște poziții politice străine de interesele acelei societăți, și anume de pe poziții politice rusești. La aceasta s-a adăugat și interferența masivă și continuă a Rusiei, interferență care a făcut ca o bună parte din mișcarea civică ucraineană, dacă vreți, să uzeze și de o platformă naționalistă. Pentru că prin nenumăratele pârghii de care dispunea în Ucraina, Rusia a făcut ca înfruntarea să nu fie doar între democrație și dictatură, să fie între naționalism și drepturile și pretinsele drepturi ale minorităților. În spatele acestei formule, ascunzându-se de fapt drepturile politice ale rusofonilor și prorușilor din Ucraina. Toate acestea nu puteau să ducă decât la confruntări civile extrem de dure, care în unele locuri, așa cum s-a întâmplat în februarie 2014, nu numai în Kiev, dar și în sud-estul Ucrainei și pe zona litoralului, zonă preponderent rusofonă, culminând cu incidentele dramatice din Odessa, nu putea să ducă decât la o confruntare de tip război civil. Pentru că susținerea pe care Rusia a acordat-o partizanilor ei în Ucraina a fost de natură să ducă la izbucnirea unui război civil, scontându-se pe anumite reacții ale societății ucrainene orientate către vest. Așa sunt lucrurile? Având în minte și modificările constituționale pe care președintele Ianukovici le-a operat încă din 2010, dacă vreți, dilema politică a Ucrainei nu mai putea fi rezolvată în interiorul sistemului constituțional legal. De unde și necesitatea, dacă vreți, a preluării puterii de către Parlament care în cursul evenimentelor s-a transformat în bastionul protestatarilor, aflat în opoziție irreductibilă cu președintele. De altfel, la o zi după semnarea acelui acord din 19 februarie, menit să ducă la formarea unui guvern de Uniune Națională și la organizarea unor noi alegeri prezidențiale, Ianukovici a fugit la Harkov, unde a încercat să preia conducerea unei mișcări politice ucrainene, dar pro-ruse, menită să ducă la federalizarea Ucrainei și la împărțirea acesteia în diverse republici autonome. Evoluții, dacă vreți, susținute în bună măsură și de cele din vestul Ucrainei, unde au fost destul de multe voci care și-au declarat, dacă vreți, autonomia față de guvernul de la Kiev. Și în acest moment apare intervenția Rusiei, începând cu 1 martie, uzând și abuzând, de fapt uzând de o pretinsă cerere a președintelui Ianukovici de asistență militară pentru reinstaurarea ilegalității. Acestea sunt evenimentele politice, din politice și militare. Din punct de vedere, dacă vreți, civic, Maidanul este dezvoltarea naturală a ceea ce Ucraina a început în 2004. Succesul operațiunii rusești de preluare a Crimeei și de deschidere a acestor fronturi, pe care le-au dorit fronturi de război civil rușii în primă instanță. Nu atât fronturi de cucerire, ceea ce încearcă ei acum când doresc să se consolideze în sud-estul Ucrainei. Putin, după precedentul oferit de războiul civil din Ucraina, care s-a suprapus și el războiului civil din Rusia din perioada 1918-1921, plecând de la acest precedent, a încercat să poziționeze practic baza de operațiune a taberei pro-ruse în Ucraina, în sud-estul acesteia, având în centru capitala Harkov. De aici și eforturile disperate de acum ale rușilor de a cuceri nu doar Mariupolul pentru a face coridorul terestru cu Crimea, dar și Harkovul, care întotdeauna a fost, dacă vreți, capitala atitudinilor pro-ruse din Ucraina, de unde a pornit recucerirea de către Rusia întregii Ucraine. Ori acest lucru a început să se schimbe din 2004-2005. Sigur, semnele au fost mai de mult, dar, dacă vreți, procesul a intrat într-o accelerare formidabilă începând cu 2014. Atunci a avut loc adevăratul șoc de natură culturală al Ucrainei, în care ucrainenii, fie că erau din vest, fie că erau din est, fie că erau ucrainofoni sau rusofoni, cei mai mulți dintre ei, au înțeles că dictatura lui Putin, care vrea să întruchipeze așa zisele valori tradiționale ale Rusiei, nu le sunt prieteni. Că toată această vorbărie despre frățietate, despre identitate civilizațională și chiar etnică, nu este decât o operațiune de propagandă menită să ascundă obiectivele politice și militare ale Rusiei în raport cu Ucraina. Iar pe acest fond s-a petrecut practic o închidere rapidă, sigur, poate nu reversibilă, asta nu avem de unde să știm, a prăpastiei care despărțea până atunci cele două trunchiuri ale poporului ucrainean, vestul și estul.
Orange Revolution, the revolution of dignity. The last one didn't end well because in the same year, 2014, Russia entered Crimea and took this part of the Ukrainian territory. What do you remember from that time? Because that was the start of the war that continues until today.
Yes, I really feel like it was the very beginning of the war we see now, because it was the first take from Putin, from Kremlin, whatever we can call it, to take a land, to basically occupy the land of the other sovereign independent country, and he didn't see much response from the whole, like, united European and global society.
European Union and
yes, UN also, like, it wasn't such a response as we see it now. But what I felt back then was a big scare, because it gave me a lot of pain. I have friends who lived, for example, in Donetsk, and they were forced to move to Kiev or to other places, but they chose Kiev, and that's the position which I am now. And only now I can understand them. They got through like enormous pain. But I remember one story which had a big, huge influence on me. Back then, when Russia invaded Donbass, the east part of our country, we were helping, me and my friends, teenagers who were 15, 16 years old, were helping the military hospital in Kiev. And once we came with goods that we bought on market to the center, special center where all volunteers gather all the goods. And I saw a young man in military uniform who was a Ukrainian soldier, and he was standing with his back turned to me. And I thought back then, like, oh my God, it's so good that he came home alive. And then he turned to me, and I saw that he was holding the bottle of water just with his, I don't know even how to name them in English, but with those parts of his arms, because he didn't have the other
elbows.
Elbows, yes, exactly. Didn't have another part of his arms. And it was, you know, such a click, because I just thought about it. And that like picture, it showed me back then that the thing that Russia do to our country is not just bad, it's just incomprehensible. How can such things happen in 21st century, in 2014, 2022, never mind. How can young people die? How can civilians die? Yes, basically that's it.
Unfortunately, we also the crimes that happens today in Ukraine. In the next episode of our interview, we'll talk with persons who are still now in Ukraine and are fighting on the front. Vă mulțumim că ne-ați urmărit. Din păcate, iată, războiul lasă urme adânci. Războiul nu e de dorit de nimeni, e o crimă până la urmă, dar nu există neutralitate în această situație, nu există, nu pot sta deoparte.